This is Jamey from Stonemaier Games, and for this week's Sunday sit-down video, I'm not going to talk about my top 10 favorite games in a category. Rather, I'm going to talk about my coworker Joe's top 10 favorite games. Now, why am I doing this? Joe has been working for Stonemaier Games full-time since January. Before that, I was the only full-time employee here, and so this channel is mostly about my opinions about games, but Joe is a great part of the company. He is the one that teaches me a lot of games now. I learn a lot of games from Joe, and I've known Joe for a couple of years now. He's been coming to my game night for quite some time, so we've played quite a few games together, and it's interesting to see what's on his list here. So I invited him to make a top 10 list, and I thought I would share it with you so you can see what the other full-time employee at Stonemaier Games thinks about games as well, so it's not just me. So Joe's number 10 favorite game is Sushi Roll. This is I actually really miss Sushi Roll because I'm in self-isolation right now. Joe has almost kind of the group's copy of Sushi Roll, but it is a fantastic game. It was on my top 10 list for top 10 favorite dice games. Oh, and just to let you know, on this top 10 list, I'm going to talk about Joe's favorite games from my perspective. Joe just gave me the list, and I'll share kind of my thoughts on them. And if I know something from Joe's mind about it, I will mention that as well. But I can see why Sushi Roll is on the list. Joe was the one that introduced it to my group, and we just had a blast playing it. And the thing that I mentioned that I really love about Sushi Roll is that the specific level of information that you have about the dice that are coming around the table. In Sushi Roll, on your turn, you are being passed a set of dice, and then you are selecting one of those dice and then passing it on to the next player. But every player always has a tray of dice in front of them. And so oh, and I forgot the key part of it. When I receive the dice, I roll them. And that's the thing that I really like, that you're not just receiving dice that are pre-rolled at the beginning of the round. You are receiving dice where you can see what types of dice you're receiving, but you still get the pleasure of rolling them and ideally rolling something that you really need and then selecting it. So I like the balance of information there. You know what dice you're getting, but you don't know exactly what's going to be on those dice. That's Joe's number 10 favorite game right now, Sushi Roll. Joe's number 9 favorite game right now is the Gallerist. The Gallerist is a game that I've only played once, and it's been quite some time. I remember it having a beautiful production. I love the little easels in it. Really, really great component for the game. I think I've seen Joe play it. I haven't really talked to Joe too much about this game. But there's a lot of theme, as with any Vitalis sort of game. There's a lot of theme ingrained into the mechanisms. It was a little over my head because it's one of those games where you have a core action to take, and then you have a lot of bonus actions that you can also take. And so it's an odd game where you don't. It's almost hard to tell when the person's turn before you has ended so that you can go ahead and take your turn. And there are some clever interactions in this game too. I mean, I would guess that one of Joe's favorite mechanisms in the game are the positive player interactions, because I recall there's an element in the game about when you're moving your meeple or a meeple somewhere on the board, you might trigger an ability for another player's meeple. And so another player might benefit from your action. I think Joe really likes those positive player interactions in games. I don't remember much more about it, so I won't say much more, but Joe's number 9 favorite game is the Gallerist. Joe's number 8 favorite game is Terraforming Mars. This made an appearance on my last video when I talked about the top 10 the top 10 games on Board Game Geek right now, and how this is probably my favorite among those games. Terraforming Mars is a wonderful game. I love the drafting. I don't think you have to draft in Terraforming Mars, but I love the drafting, and I love that you have to pay for the cards that you draft if you want to even keep them in the first place. That is a really clever decision point. I love the engine building in Terraforming Mars, how every round you're getting more and more income that relates to what you can do that round and how you can progress the game forward. There's a lot to love about the game. I can't really guess what Joe's favorite part of it is, but I really do enjoy I enjoy everything about Terraforming Mars. It's a fantastic game. And that's Joe's number 8. Joe's number 7 is Nusfjord, a lesser known Uwe Rosenberg game that came out a few years ago about running kind of a fishing village. And I have a video about this. This is one that I actually don't remember playing all that much, but I thought I had played it, and I do have a video out there about it. And I remember enjoying something about the fishing and the boats and something like that, but I can't go into I don't remember it well enough to go into it. But I'm glad Joe loves it, and it's the number 7 game. In fact, I see a couple Uwe Rosenberg games on here. There's another one that will come up in a little bit. Joe's number 6 favorite game is It's a Wonderful World. I believe he brought a big, beautiful Kickstarter version to the table a few months ago when we played it. I think Joe actually already also somehow got a version of It's a Wonderful World before while it was on Kickstarter, right before it was on Kickstarter. So I played it around that time. I think that's when I did my video about it. Um, but it's a great drafting game, really, really satisfying drafting game that flows really nicely. And it's one of those. It's one of the breed of Euro games where there is a story to be told in the game as well, not just within each specific session of the game, but in the version of the game that you get on Kickstarter. I believe there's a bit of a campaign that you can play through, which I think is really neat when Euro games combine those narrative elements with the Euro game. It's very high up on Joe's list. I don't even know if it would quite make my top 10 drafting games, but I have posted about It's a Wonderful World, or I posted about drafting games recently on Instagram, and a lot of people really love this game. So I can totally see why it's on Joe's top 10. Number 5 is a game that I really should have played by now, because I know how much Joe loves it. He's brought it to game nights many, many times. He's played it with a lot of people, but somehow I have not played it, and that is The King of Siam. This is a game, I believe, based in Thailand, or with a theme, a Thai theme, and Joe raves about it. I really know very little about it, but I need to play this. I need to do a video about it. Hopefully when self-isolation is over, we can do that. I think one of the reasons we haven't played it is that Joe and I often play games. We play games with more people on Wednesday nights, but Joe also comes by some other time during the week to my home office to teach and play games. But I don't think this game works great at 2 is what I'm recalling, and so that's why we probably haven't played it. But with the full 4, Joe raves about it. I've heard wonderful things about it. That's The King of Siam. Hopefully he'll show up. He'll put a photo up of a game session that he's played of it. I don't have a photo of it. Number 4, yeah, this is one that I do have, and this is one that I've really enjoyed. I can totally say why it's on Joe's list, and that is Glen More II Chronicles. This is a game that has got a ton of play in our group before self-isolation. People keep asking for it. It's been passed around so much, and I currently have my own copy. Fortunately, this is the group's original copy, and it's fantastic. I did a video about it recently, but the core element in Glen More is one of my favorite mechanisms. And it combines tile laying with engine building and a one-way worker selection time track. So on your turn, if you have the worker who's in last place on the track really, you advance it to any space ahead of the previous players and choose a tile and choose the corresponding tile and add it to your tableau. I love that mechanism, and I love that when you add the tile to your tableau, it not only activates its own ability, but it also activates the abilities of all the tiles around it. I also really like in Glen More how it's a lot of the interactions of the game, other than taking tiles. There's great like Euro-style interactions in this game, other than taking tiles from other players, not from their tableau, but from the common array. You also are, whenever you're scoring, you're comparing yourself to the other players. So you might be really, really good at making whiskey, but which is great. You're going to get some points from that. But having 20 whiskey doesn't really do all that good for you. What matters is how much whiskey you have compared to the other players, to the player with the least whiskey, who gets no points. And I love that comparison. Just so many great interactions in this game. I can totally see why Joe loves it, because the interactions are they're not direct, and they're not always necessarily positive, but they aren't spiteful or anything like that. But they're just really interesting Euro-style interactions. That is Glen More II Chronicles, Joe's number 4 favorite game right now. Joe's number 3 favorite game, this is no surprise for me, is Pandemic Legacy Season 1. And Joe is using this as a kind of a category for all Pandemic stuff. Joe and his girlfriend Lindsay are very good at Pandemic. They have played a lot of Pandemic. They played in tournaments for Pandemic. And I think they have maybe not every game in the Pandemic collection, but a lot of them. And they just really, really love this game. I particularly do enjoy the legacy versions of Pandemic. I think they're fantastic. The stories they tell, both the more linear aspect of Season 1 and the branching exploration element of Season 2. I love that. And I love the tension in it. Pandemic is one of those games where the first time I played it, I wanted to play it again and again and again because I wanted to try to beat it. Had that really nice sweet spot of difficulty. And I don't think I've ever played, I'm not sure if I've ever played Pandemic with Joe and or Lindsay. So I need to try that at some point just to see what their level of thinking is, because I'm sure it's way more advanced than mine. But that's Pandemic. Feel free to share in the comments your favorite Pandemic. Joe listed specifically Pandemic Legacy Season 1 as his favorite for this category of games, and that is his number 3 favorite game. Now, Joe does work for Stonemaier Games. I don't usually allow, or I don't allow myself to put my own games or our own games on these lists. But I did give Joe any restrictions here, and he did mention that Viticulture, to my pleasant surprise, is his number 2 favorite game. Which I was happy to hear. I'm glad that I know that Joe stands behind the games at Stonemaier Games. He wouldn't work with us if he didn't, but it's really neat to hear that one of our games and the first game that I designed for Stonemaier Games made his list. I love a lot about Viticulture. I could go on and on about what I love about Viticulture. I'll mention one random thing. Yeah, one of my favorite things that I love about Viticulture is the aging of grapes and wine. I love the idea that you can make something, you can make grapes, you can make wine, and then those things, as long as you don't give them up, they continue to get better and better. They age, they increase in value just because you have them. And that to me is very satisfying when you have something in the game where you create something and then its value isn't static based on the moment you create it. It can actually get more and more valuable the longer you wait. I think Tzolk'in is another great example of this. You're not necessarily making something, but you're putting a worker down, you're committing to that, you're spending the resources necessary to put a worker down, the corn, and then the worker gets more and more valuable the more patient you are, which is very much the case in Viticulture as well. So I'm glad to hear Viticulture made Joe's list at the number 2 slot. The number 1 slot on Joe's favorite games list is A Feast for Odin. This is the other Uwe Rosenberg game that I mentioned. This is a game that I've also played many times. I think he and Lindsay may have introduced me to it because they were loving this game when I first met them, and I'm glad to hear they still love it. I think they have probably all the expansions at this point. And this is a game that inspired Tapestry actually directly, because A Feast for Odin is a game with many, many different worker placement spots. I think there are 61, maybe 62, somewhere around there. And so every time you're choosing an action, you have so many different choices, but the game does little things to help you focus on some of those choices more than others, based on some of the cards that you might have, the things that you're trying to create on your little puzzle board, the food that you need to obtain to provide a feast every round, and also the number of workers that you have, because they're in this big worker placement. Hopefully Joe will throw up an image here, but there are on the worker placement board, there are different columns requiring different numbers of workers. So early in the round, you might know, okay, I have plenty of workers, I have all these actions to decide from, but later in the round, you might have exactly 3 workers. So you might specifically look at the 3 worker column for an actions. And one of the things I love about this, I always mention this about Feast for Odin because it kind of astounds me that it's true, but every time I play, I kind of discover a new action on there that I didn't really use or didn't even notice before. I definitely remember this the last time I played it. I was like, oh wow, I've just never even used that action before, because there are so many other actions. And so I love the variability and the replayability that comes from discovering those actions and maybe picking a few of them for a certain game to really focus on and really get to know. So that is A Feast for Odin, Joe's number 1 favorite game. And again, that has been on my top 10 list a few different times. So thank you, Joe, for making this list. I hope this gives you some insight into the types of games that the people who work at Stonemaier Games really enjoy. Joe is my other full-time employee, or full-time coworker, and we might have lists coming from Morton and Alan as well if they decide to put them together. It's totally up to them. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on these games that I mentioned, especially some of the ones that I didn't go into too much detail about because I either haven't played them or haven't played them in a while. Yeah, feel free to share that in the comments below. Share your thoughts. Thanks.